Today we're going to be making a hand-painted Christmas sign.
This sign is an awesome way to learn a new skill and to add some color to your home for the holiday season.
So this Joy to the World is a custom graphic that we've made just for this project. We are going to show you how to print it out, transfer it, paint it on, and then have this final product.
At the market, we do a lot of transferring of digital graphics into physical objects, and we usually utilize methods where we're getting things cut by laser cutters or by vinyl decals. But this material called graphite paper is a great way to make that more micro and to be able to transfer smaller items onto the materials you're working with. The graphite paper will allow us to create a pencil outline that applies the letters directly to the board itself. This will create somewhat of a paint by number look onto the board.
So we are going to be using 3 different paint colors based on the graphic that we are printing out. We're going to start with a dark green paint. We're also using a red and a white cream color. You really can use any finish that you prefer, but if you're following along with us today, we're going to be using a latex interior paint in a flat or eggshell finish. For this project specifically, we're going to be using paint colors in the Magnolia Homes line since that is where we work. We are using 1905 green. We are also using Home at Last and lit candles. Next, you're going to want your wooden panel board. This is a round 16-inch diameter board. It's really easy to find in any hardware store or craft store.
The other things we're going to be using are a paint tray and a paint roller to paint our initial green color.
So for the paint brushes that we're using specifically acrylic brushes, but you can find in any craft store a variety pack. Just be sure that you look for something that has a variety of an angle, sort of a straight flat brush, and the rounded thinner brushes, so you can really achieve that detail.
Finally, make sure you have your graphite paper. Graphite paper is sold online and at some specialty art stores. A lot of craft stores have it, but it might be a little hard to get your hands on there. We're using a 24-inch roll, but you can use a 12-inch roll and just tape it together for this project.
All right, so we're gonna get started laying the initial base color of the green. So we're gonna clear our materials. So for this, we're using the dark green color. What's nice about this one is that it's muted. It has a vintagey, antique feel to it.
So we're gonna pour it here into our little tray for Mary Grace. You don't need very much, but enough to make sure your roller or your paintbrush, if you're using one, is completely covered. We're gonna just use this roll of tape that we have to just kind of space up our panel so that we can get around those edges really easily without getting too much on our work surface.
Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and dip our roller. As you can see, I'm just rolling it alongside the tray just to really wipe off all of that excess paint. And then I like to always start in the middle of the panel just because then you can evenly reach out to all of the edges. Usually one layer with a dark color like this will cover it, especially when you are going onto a new piece of wood.
So Mary Grace is just rolling over her fully covered surface just to make it very even and make sure there's not any large chunks or any spots that are too thin where the wood might show through after the first coat.
So when you do start to get to the edges, I find that going over the top a few more times works better so that you aren't dripping with paint off of your roller, because since you are changing the angle of the roller, it is gonna start to fall a little bit more. So if you have a little bit less on your roller, it is really going to coat the sides in the best way possible.
Okay, now we have our first layer painted and the sides around the edges are painted. So we just need to give it about an hour until it's dry to the touch to flip it over and paint the other side.
Okay, now that our sign is completely dry to the touch, front and back, we are ready for the next step, which is going to be printing off a graphic.
This graphic was designed by our graphic design team here at Magnolia. They're an awesome creative team that do all the branding for our entire company.
So once you have the graphic printed out, it's going to be printed onto 4 different pages. So you're gonna go ahead and lay it out in the order that it appears on the graphic when you look at it on the computer. and you can see that there are white edges around it. So what we're gonna do is cut it off just so the words are very easy to read.
So for now, we're going to just cut our straight edges along the 90-degree angles of our green circle. We're gonna leave the rounded edges just for this first part, and we'll tape it together and then cut that part off.
So now that we know what order our pieces of paper are going in to create the whole graphic, we're gonna go ahead and flip the whole thing over, tape off the back just so that it is one secure piece.
These larger pieces will help us just keep it together a lot more easily when we flip it over. So now that we have it all taped together, I'm just gonna flip it over and check my graphic. It looks like everything lined up pretty well. So the last step before transferring is cutting off the rest of the white. So again, this does not have to be perfect. We just wanna cut along the edges of this circle just to get the white off. This will help us be able to center the graphic a little bit more accurately on our actual panel.
So now that our design is prepped, the next step is going to be transferring it onto the board.
So this is where we're going to utilize our graphite paper. So we're gonna lay our graphite side down with that waxy side facing up towards us. We're gonna set it here. We're gonna make sure we have enough of a length that it covers the full diameter of our circle. So once you have that laid out, you can go ahead and give it just a rough cut along the edge. Graphite paper can be reused because you're only using a small amount of the actual surface area of your material. So we're just taping directly onto the surface because we have a lot of excess around the edges. If you're using a really small piece, you might need to tape it directly to your board, which is totally fine as well. So we're just gonna go around the perimeter just to make sure we have a really solid connection point so that this isn't moving around too much on us.
So the next step is going to be laying down our graphic onto the graphite paper. You can see sort of the silhouette of the board underneath the paper. Just do your best to center the circle into what you can see of the board. And then we will go ahead and tape it down so there's not a ton of movement.
Once you have that really secured, this is where a handy dandy pencil comes in, and we're going to trace over every line on this graphic. So this is a little bit of a time intensive part, but it's worth it to make sure that you get those crisp edges to give you that professional look at the end. So I'm going to take the edge of my pencil and just start here on this corner line, coming around all of these curves. I'm applying a generous amount of pressure, but not too much. Graphite paper transfers with the amount of pressure that you're applying. So before we finish and take our graphic off, we just want to make sure for sure that we definitely got every line, because once you take this off, you're not going to be able to put it back on in the same place that it was. So we just want to make sure we got everything traced out. Okay, this looks great. We have really clear, crisp lines that will allow us to be able to paint really easily. We're gonna start with our red color first, so we'll go ahead and pull that out.
So we have our paint open. For this gallon, it does sort of have that white milky residue, so it'll be really important that we stir it.
I'm just gonna grab some water and some paper towels too. This will help keep it tidy and clean while we're working. And then we have all of our paint brushes.
So once I dip it, I usually like to just kind of brush it alongside the edge just so that it's not a ton right at first. Since we are trying to do such a fine line, having less is more here.
Because Mary Grace is right-handed, she's gonna work from left to right to make sure that she has a clean surface area to set her hand on while she's working. So Mary Grace is taking the edge of that angled brush and just layering that paint in along the edge of the graphite line to make sure that she's getting that really straight, crisp edge.
So when using this angled brush, I'm really going for the longer areas that need to be covered. I'm holding off on these shorter blocks and squares to use a smaller brush just because it's going to be easier to keep it inside of the lines. Now that we're done with the word world, we are going to move on to the, and since it's a much smaller word, We are going to use a smaller brush just to really get those finite details. And Liz is putting our brush in water because once latex does dry, it will ruin the brush. So we do try to rinse it out as soon as we can so that we can keep using that tool. And since this paint is a little bit more transparent than the green because it's going on to a darker base, we are going to go in with a second coat on both the red and the white. And in that second coat, we can really be sure to cover up all of the graphite. So once you're done with that first coat of red, we're just gonna let it sit for about 15 to 20 minutes until it's dry. If you're impatient like we are, and a lot of the projects that we do here in the studio, we'll often use a hair dryer to dry some paint. This coat should be faster since we already have some red on there. I'm just gonna go ahead and apply it in the exact same way I did the first coat, and then we can move on to the white. Okay, I think we're done with the second coat.
We're going to be utilizing our same paint brushes that we used for our red, so we just want to make sure that we get them really cleaned off. This is when it's helpful to probably run them under the sink a little bit just to get them really clean, but I'm just rubbing them into a paper towel to get any of that excess clumpy paint off, and then just giving them a little rinse after that.
Okay, so for this white color, we're going to use just one of the standard flat brushes. It's a kind of an in-between size of what we've been working on. So I'm gonna start with the Joy 2 because that's what I would just naturally do, just so that my hand doesn't smudge all of the wet paint.
So this text, the Joy 2, is a little bit more curved. So we're just making sure we're working along those edges using the flat edge of our brush. We're gonna work along those curved edges. So Mary Grace just finished the top portion of Joy 2. She's moving down to World because that part is still wet, so she worked from the top down.
Okay, so the first coat of white is done. Like last time, we're gonna go ahead and blow dry it just to dry it up faster. We just need a quick second coat of the white to really get that bright color, and then we are all done. All right, so now we've got the second coat of white on. Once it dries, we will be done painting.
So now we have our final product. I think it looks really awesome. You can see how that transfer paper really gives it those clean edges and those really fine lines. I think we did an awesome job. And at this point, you could just set this on a mantle, set it in a bookcase, you could set it on your front porch, but we're gonna show you a really cool method on how to hang it with a velvet ribbon. For this method, you're gonna need a couple of about 1/4-inch eye hooks, along with a drill and a drill bit that's a little bit smaller than the base of your eye hook. In this case, it's probably about 1/8 inch, maybe a little larger. The last thing you'll need is a piece of velvet ribbon. The length is kind of up to you, as well as the style and the design. We're using kind of a rusty red that matches the red in our sign. And then I'm gonna take my drill and make sure it's rotating clockwise so that I can drill into this board. Drill into it. And we're gonna rotate these hooks to kind of face parallel to the face of our sign. So the last step is adding our ribbon. We have a small length of ribbon here, and we're gonna go ahead and just tie a really simple knot into that eye of our eye hook. So the last thing I'm gonna do is go ahead and tie the knot on the opposite end. And then we can take our scissors here in a second and trim off any of the excess. So now we've completed our sign. It looks awesome. The colors are really poppy. It's super bright. All of the hard work that you guys did paid off. We hope that you can transfer this skill to any other creative projects that you'd like in the future.
Yeah, I had so much fun making this with you, and I hope you guys had fun following along making your first hand-painted holiday sign.